to having had a spiritual awakening. The only word that's been changed in the 12 steps from the time they were originally written in 1939, changing it from experience to awakening. But they both mean exactly the same thing. Okay?
Yeah,
right.
I like that idea of change. I told you last night, when I first got here, I stood at the back of the rooms, looked down at my feet, and I was ashamed of what I'd become. And I wanted to change. I wanted to be different. I didn't like me. I knew if you knew me, you wouldn't like me either. So I did what most new people do. I looked around the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I picked me out some heroes. We all do that. I think that's necessary. Charlie was one of my heroes, and I emulated Charlie. I tried to be just like Charlie. Because I didn't like me. I'm going to be like him because I like him. So I don't like me. And so I thought the change they talk about was for me to change from what I was to something else. Thank God I didn't make it. One Charlie's enough, believe me. And I love Charlie. He's my sponsor today. But that's the type of change I thought they were talking about. Today I look back and I see the type of change they're really talking about. To change from what I had become to that which God intends for me to be. That's the type of change that we're really talking about. And I know today that God didn't make any junk. We're all uniquely different. And that uniqueness is what we're trying to bring out within ourselves, our own change that God intended for just for me to be. That's all.
Let's go back to page 25 now. Last paragraph. If you're as seriously alcoholic as we were, we believe there is no middle-of-the-road solution. We were in a position where life was becoming impossible. And if we had passed into the region from which there is no return through human aid, we had but two alternatives. One was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could.
Which is step one.
And the other to accept spiritual help.
Which is step two. And there's no door three. That's it.
This we did because we honestly wanted to and were willing to make the effort. You know, one of the catchphrases in AA today I hear a lot is, you better not talk too much about God or you'll run the newcomer off. But if you'll notice, the book doesn't mind talking about God. And the book doesn't mind getting around to the point, finally telling us we just got one or two choices. We can continue as we are and drink until we die from alcoholism, or we can accept spiritual help. And it seems as though we don't have any other choices in that. And my old sponsor straightened me out in that area. He said, Charlie, you don't need to worry about running new people off talking about God. He said, if you do, whiskey will put them right back in here. And he said, when they come back, they'll probably be ready to talk about God, you know. And I found that to be true over and over and over and over again. I don't think we need to hesitate talking about God. I don't think we need to be embarrassed by that situation at all. And I think we do a disservice to people in AA when we lead them to believe that all you got to do is just come to 90 meetings in 90 days and everything will be all right. You know, we're going to have the aid of a power greater than human power. Now, you would have thought this thing about the spiritual experience, just at first blush, you would think it would have come from somebody, surely, in religion. And I'm always amazed when I look at this next example in the big book on page 26 and see where this thing really did come from. It just blows my mind every time I look at it.
I love this portion of the book. He says, a certain American businessman, which was that Roland Hazard, had ability, good sense, and high character. For years he had floundered from one sanitarium to another. His family was very wealthy. They could afford a lot of treatment for him. He wore out all the American psychiatrists. He'd consulted the very best-known American psychiatrists. Then he'd gone to Europe, placing himself in the care of the celebrated physician, the psychiatrist Dr. Hume, who prescribed for him. Now, he didn't go over there for a 30-day treatment program. He went over there for 1 solid year, and while he was there, one of the best psychiatrists in the world completely psychoanalyzed Roland from top to bottom, the very best that money can buy. Though experience had made him skeptical, he finished his treatment with unusual confidence. His physical and mental condition was unusually good. Above all, he believed he had acquired such a profound knowledge of the inner workings of his mind and his hidden springs that relapse was unthinkable. He gets out after a year. He's heading to the ship to come back to the U.S. He gets drunk on the way to the ship. Nevertheless, he was drunk in a short time. More baffling still, he could give himself no satisfactory explanation for his fall. So he returned to this doctor whom he admired, and he asked him point blank why he could not recover. He wished above all things to regain self-control. He seemed quite rational and well-balanced with respect to other problems, yet he had no control whatever over alcohol. Why was this? He begged the doctor to tell him the whole truth, and he got it. In the doctor's judgment, he was utterly hopeless. He could never regain his position in society, and he'd have to place himself under lock and key or hire a bodyguard if he expected to live long. That was a great physician's opinion. And we think about that. This was kind of low blow to old Roland. Been over there for a year and got drunk. The doctor said, Roland, you're going to have to hire yourself a bodyguard if you expect to live long. Psychiatry, and I've done all I can do for you. I mean, you've been here for a year. I've done all I can possibly do for you. Now, he could have said to Roland, as my doctor did, Joe, you have a Valium deficiency. Keep coming back and we'll treat you some more. But he didn't do that. What he said to him was, Roland, we've done all we can do for you. We can't help you anymore. There's nothing more we can do for you. You have to hire a bodyguard or a lock and key and lock yourself up. That was a great physician's opinion. But this man still lives and is a free man. He does not need a bodyguard, nor is he confined. He can go anywhere on this earth where other free men may go without disaster, provided he remains willing to maintain a certain simple attitude. Now, some of our alcoholic readers may think they can do without spiritual help. Let us tell you the rest of the conversation our friend had with this doctor. The doctor said, you have the mind of a chronic alcoholic, and I've never seen one single case recover where that state of mind existed to the extent that it does in you. Our friend felt as though the gates of hell had closed on him with a clang. He said to the doctor, is there no exceptions?
Yes, replied the doctor, there is. Exceptions to cases such as yours have been occurring since early times. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are phenomena. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements.
Change.
Ideas, emotions, and attitudes which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men are suddenly cast to one side.
Change.
And a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them.
Change.
In fact, I've been trying to produce some such emotional rearrangement within you.
Change.
With many individuals, the method which I employed are successful, but I've never been successful with an alcoholic of your description. For amplification, see Appendix 2. They want to be sure we understand about this spiritual experience. Now, can you imagine the humility of this little doctor? There was the three best-known psychiatrists in the world at that time. There was Dr. Freud, Dr. Adler, and Dr. Jung. Adler and Jung were both students of Freud. Jung had fallen out with Freud and Adler on one thing and one thing only. Freud and Adler felt that all problems could be solved through the mind, period. Jung felt that sometimes spirituality might be the answer to this thing. And can you imagine the humility of him being able to say to Roland, Roland, I've done all I can for you. With all the knowledge I have of the mind, I can do nothing more for you, and you're probably going to die from alcoholism. And Roland said, are there no exceptions to this? And this little doctor said, oh, yeah, once in a great while. We've seen alcoholics of your type have vital spiritual experiences. He said, I don't understand them. They're phenomena to me. But they all got certain things in common. It seemed as though old ideas, emotions, and attitudes were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men are cast to one side and replaced with a new set of ideas, emotions, and attitudes. And they're able to live then without drinking. You know, I sometimes I think in AA we forget the gratitude that we owe to a lot of these people. And when you really look at our program and see where it comes from, it absolutely amazes me. You know, Bill Wilson always said, he said, I knew none of these things. He said, all this information from diverse sources came into my mind and gelled, and I was able to write the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, step one comes to us from a doctor in New York City named Dr. Silkworth, who's non-alcoholic. Step two comes to us from a psychiatrist on the other side of the world named Dr. Jung, who's non-alcoholic. The last 10 steps came to us from a group of people practicing first-century Christianity who were non-alcoholics. Everything that we use in our program came to us from non-alcoholic people. And we who are so proud of our 12 steps, and rightly we should be so, but I think we need to stop and remember sometimes that we didn't know any of this stuff. It all came to us from non-alcoholic people. I think we need to remember that. Joe?
Dr. Silkworth, he knew what the problem was, but he didn't have any solution for it other than don't drink. You see, Dr. Jung, he had the solution, a vital spiritual experience, but he didn't understand the problem. The Oxford groups had a planned program of action. They weren't interested in the problem or the solution. All this stuff gelled in the mind of Bill Wilson. And a wholesale miracle has happened in our lifetime, if you will. Because back then, Dr. Jung told Roland that just here and there, just once in a great while, alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. This morning, today, we can look around these rooms and say to each other that here and now, every time an alcoholic will apply these steps to their life, they too can recover. A wholesale miracle has happened in our lifetime. Thank God it happened in my lifetime. Thank God it did.
We always like to say, is that odd or is that God, you reckon? Mm-hmm. Now we're going to put a little picture up here just to kind of illustrate this chapter 2. What is the solution? And on one side of this picture you see the fellowship which supports us, where the older members, through the sharing of their experience, strength, and hope with the newcomer, provides enough support for the new member to stay sober for a period of time. And by the way, it's a two-way street. As the older member supports the new member, the older member draws strength from that too. A lot of power in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, it would be almost impossible today to be in AA very long and not begin to believe there's some kind of power, greater than human power, working within and throughout this fellowship. When you hear literally hundreds of people saying it's only by the grace of God, or because of a power greater than I am, or because of God as I understand Him, I haven't found it necessary to take a drink in X number of days, weeks, months, or years. You can hardly hear that over and over and over and over, and not begin to believe there must be some power greater than human power working within this fellowship. And the instant the newcomer begins to believe that, then that opens the mind, and the newcomer becomes willing to investigate. And upon investigation, he finds this simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet, the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And as he progresses through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, he has a vital spiritual experience or spiritual awakening. It revolutionizes our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and toward God's universe. A personality change sufficient to recover from alcoholism. Now, when that happens to the newcomer, then that newcomer becomes an older member. They can now go back to the left-hand side of the sheet and support the next newcomer that comes in. And if you'll notice, we're basing older membership not on how long you've been sober, but upon the quality of that sobriety. You see, when AA first began, way back years ago, there was never any question about this. The newcomer was expected to work the steps and have a spiritual awakening and then be able to help the next person that came in. And if the newcomer wouldn't work the steps, the older member said, well, you might as well leave, because there's nothing we can do to help you unless you're willing to undergo this program of recovery. But then slowly, we begin to water the program down. People begin to stay sober on fellowship only. And the instant that we did that, we went from a life-changing program to a non-drinking program. And then we begin to measure success in self-defense on how long have you been sober, rather than by the quality of that sobriety. And today in AA, you see all kinds of people. You see somebody that's only been in here maybe 6 months or a year, got them a good sponsor, got into the program, had a spiritual experience, a spiritual awakening, and they are a delight to behold. They're always laughing and cutting up and having fun. They're always helping other people and doing everything they can to help AA, and you just love to be around them. Then you have some in here that have been in here 7, 8, 9, 10 years, treated it like a cafeteria, took what they wanted and left what they wanted. Now, they're better than they used to be, but you never know what kind of shape they're going to be in the next time you run into them. One day they're up and the next day they're down, and it's kind of like a yo-yo, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. They're sober, but the quality of the sobriety is not too good. Then you see some that have been in here 20 and 25 and 30 years, never worked a step, damn proud of it. And they're the ones that say, by God, if you want what we've got and you're willing. Now, some of those guys feel so lousy you'd like to buy them a drink. Damn good and well they would feel that, they say. So we're not talking about length of sobriety. We're talking purely about quality of the sobriety. That's recovery from alcoholism. I had a period of time in AA when I was dry sober. My God, that was the most miserable time in my life. Wanting to drink and couldn't get along with nothing or anybody, period. Finally began to work the program, and life changed entirely. And the quality of my sobriety is much better than it used to be. Okay, this thing says a gift shop is selling raffle tickets for a big book also. Would like to let everyone know that the big book and cruise that you speak of are only being sold near the registration table. So if you buy your raffle tickets, buy them at the registration table. That's the one for our big book and for our cruise. I have no idea who's selling the others. I don't guess it makes a hell of a lot of difference, does it? Okay.
Bill was presented by a solution by Ebby. Bill was aghast at that solution. He knew that we were going to be aghast too. And so now he writes on page 30 more about alcoholism. Because he's going to tell us more about what might happen to us unless we accept the solution that he just described. And this chapter could be called More Truth About Alcoholism, but it's just called More About Alcoholism. See, I do better when I know better. They didn't talk about these kinds of things when I was in the bars that I used to hang around in. So when I come to AA, I was unaware or ignorant of the facts. And when I got in AA, I need to know what the facts were. And this chapter, More About Alcoholism, is going to tell me some facts about alcoholism.
Step 2 says we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Well, if we have to be restored to sanity, then that indicates we must be insane. And many alcoholics are highly offended when you tell them that. They say, oh, no, don't tell me I'm insane. Yeah, I do some crazy, stupid things when I'm drunk. But when I'm sober, I'm much like other people. Other alcoholics may say, well, we don't have any problem with that insanity because we remember the crazy, stupid things we did while drunk. In either case, they're referring to the insanity as the crazy, stupid things we do while drunk. No, that's not insanity. That's caused by a mind filled with a drug called alcohol. And alcohol lowers the inhibitions. And if your mind is filled with something that lowers the inhibitions, look out. You're going to do some pretty crazy, stupid things, all right. But that's not insanity. That's caused by alcohol itself. In order to understand this, and it just bugged us for years, finally, we went back to the dictionary again. And we looked up the word sane or sanity. And the dictionary defines being sane or sanity as wholeness of mind or completeness of mind. A mind that is whole, a mind that is complete, can see the truth about everything around it, makes decisions based on truth, and life turns out to be pretty good. An insane mind is one that is less than whole, cannot always see the truth about everything around it, makes a decision based on lies, and life usually turns out to be pretty lousy. To be insane does not mean you're crazy. You know, if you're crazy, you've lost more than half your marbles. And you got to be locked up somewhere to protect you and society from you. To be insane does not mean that you're crazy. It just means that you can't always see the truth about things. I think one of the greatest illustrations I've ever heard is, let's take a pie and set it here in front of us. And let's cut that pie into 10 pieces. Now you come along and I give you a piece of pie. My pie is now less than whole, but I've still got 90% of it. Somebody else comes along and I give them a piece of pie. My pie is now more or less than whole, but I still got 80% of it. To be insane does not mean you're all gone. It just means you're not quite all here. Now, when it comes to alcohol, it seems as though from time to time we're not quite all here, because we can't always see the truth about alcohol. And we make a decision based upon a lie, and then we run into the truth, and it damn near kills us. So what we're going to be looking at all the way through this little chapter, and Bill's going to use examples again to teach us. He's going to use the example of the bed of 30. He's going to use an example of a fellow named Jim. He's going to use the jaywalker, and he's going to use an example of a fellow named Fred. And each time we're going to look into our mind just before we take the first drink. Can we or can we not see the truth? If we can, we're sane. If we can't, we're insane. He starts on page 30. Most of us have been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics. No person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Therefore, it is not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people. The idea that someday somehow we'll control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity or death. We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost self that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we're like other people or presently may be has to be smashed. Now, be careful. He's using several different words here that all mean exactly the same thing. And if you see what he's doing, it makes sense. If you don't, it'll confuse you. For instance, he said, the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. Now, we know that an obsession is an idea that overcomes all ideas to the contrary, and it's so strong it can make you believe a lie. Then he said the persistence of this illusion. And we know what an illusionist is. An illusionist is a magician. And they can stand in front of you and with sleight of hand and a few props can make you believe something that isn't true. So obsession and illusion means the same thing. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity. Insanity is to believe something that is not true. The inability to see the truth. This is the first step in recovery, the delusion that we're like other people. Delusion means the same thing. If you've deluded yourself, you've come to believe something that's not true. So we may see any one of four terms: obsession, illusion, delusion, or insanity. They all mean exactly the same thing: to believe a lie or to believe something that is not true. Now let's look at the lie that we alcoholics believe just before we take the first drink. Page 32, second paragraph.
A man of 30 was doing a great deal of spree drinking. He was very nervous in the mornings after these bouts and quieted himself with more liquor. He was ambitious to succeed in business, but saw that he'd get nowhere if he drank at all. Once he started, he had no control whatever. Now, he made up his mind that until he had been successful in business and had retired, he would not touch another drop. An exceptional man. He remained bone dry 25 years and retired at the age of 55 after a successful and happy business career. Then he fell victim to a belief which practically every alcoholic has, that his long period of sobriety and self-discipline has qualified him to drink as other men. Out came his carpet slippers in a bottle. In 2 months he was in a hospital, puzzled and humiliated. He tried to regulate his drinking for a while, making several trips to the hospital in the meantime. Then, gathering all his forces, he attempted to stop altogether, and found he could not. Every means of solving his problem which money could buy was at his disposal. Every attempt failed. Though a robust man at retirement, he went to pieces quickly and was dead within 4 years. Now, this case contains a powerful lesson. Most of us have believed that if we would remain sober for a long stretch, we could thereafter drink normally. But here's a man who at 55 years found he was just where he had left off at 30. We've seen the truth demonstrated again and again. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Commencing to drink after a period of sobriety, we're in a short time as bad as ever. If we're planning to stop drinking, there must be no reservation of any kind, nor any lurking notion that someday we'll be immune to alcohol.
We know the truth to be this: once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. We've never seen one single case where one of us could go back and successfully drink alcohol. Now, to believe anything different than that is to believe a lie. Is this guy's real problem the fact that he has a physical allergy to alcohol, or that he has a form of insanity that tells him it's okay to drink alcohol? After 25 years of sobriety, he felt, now I can drink like other people. And based on the lie, he took a drink, triggered the allergy. Within 4 years, he's dead. So the real problem of the alcoholic centers in the mind, telling us we can drink, rather than in the body that ensures that we can't. And it makes no difference whether we call it insanity, obsession, illusion, delusion, or whatever you wish to. It's the believing of the lie. Let's go to page 34. Second paragraph. For those who are unable to drink moderately, the question is how to stop altogether. We are assuming, of course, that the reader desires to stop. Whether such a person can quit upon a non-spiritual basis depends upon the extent to which he's already lost the power to choose whether he will drink or not. Many of us felt we had plenty of character. There was a tremendous urge to cease forever, yet we found it impossible. This is the baffling feature of alcoholism as we know it, this utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or the wish. How then shall we help our readers determine to their own satisfaction whether they are one of us? The experiment of quitting for a period of time will be helpful, but we think we can render an even greater service to alcoholic sufferers and perhaps to the medical fraternity. So we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking, for obviously this is the crux of the problem. What sort of thinking dominates an alcoholic who repeats time after time the desperate experiment of the first drink? Friends who have reasoned with him after a spree which has brought him to the point of divorce or bankruptcy are mystified when he walks directly into a saloon. Why does he? Of what is he thinking? And we're going to look at the example of Jim, and then we'll go to lunch. It won't take but a little bit. Joe just loves old Jim.
I love Jim.
He gets screwed up with Jim once in a while, too. Let's see what he can do with him today.
Well, everybody loves Jim. You know. Our first example is a friend we shall call Jim. This man has a charming wife and family. He inherited a lucrative, almost automobile agency. He had a commendable World War record, and he's a good salesman. Everybody likes him.
Typical alcoholic, isn't he?
I like Jim. And he's an intelligent man and normal so far as we can see, except for a nervous disposition. Now, he did no drinking until he was 35. In a few years, he became so violent when intoxicated that he had to be committed. On leaving the treatment center, he came into contact with us. Well, it's the same thing. Now, we told him what we knew of alcoholism.
They told him about step 1.
And the answer we had found.
They told him about step 2.
He made a beginning.
Later on, we're going to see where step 3 is but a beginning. So apparently Jim took steps 1, 2, and 3. And immediately things started getting better for him.
His family was reassembled. He began to work as a salesman for a business he had lost through drinking. And all went well for a time. But he failed to enlarge his spiritual life.
We're going to see later on in the book the way we enlarge on step 1, 2, and 3 is through steps 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. And Jim didn't do any of those. 1, 2, 3, and he ended up drunk.
And to his consternation, he found himself drunk a half a dozen times in rapid succession. On each of these occasions, we worked with him, reviewing carefully what had happened.
Now, these were good AA members. Jim got drunk 6 times in a row. Each time they very carefully worked with him, reviewing what had happened. You get drunk 6 times in a row today, they're probably not going to have anything to do with you. Mm-hmm. These guys were great AA members.
He agreed he was in a real alcoholic and in serious condition. He knew he'd face another trip to the treatment center if he kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family for whom he had deep affection. Yet he got drunk again. We asked him to tell us exactly how this happened.
They're getting a little bit tired of Jim now. They said, My God, Jim, this is 7 times you've been drunk. Let's don't go through this anymore. You sit down here and tell us just exactly how that happened. And this is his story. I came to work on Tuesday morning. Now, we read this book for years before we saw that. I came to work on Tuesday morning.
Alcoholics are bad about Mondays, aren't we?
Bad about Monday morning. Now, we're going to look at old Jim's head, and we're going to see where he went from normal to abnormal thinking, from sane to insane thinking.
He said, I remember I felt irritated. I had to be a salesman for a concern I once owned.
I think that's normal. I think any of us that had to be a salesman for a concern we once owned, we'd probably be a little bit irritated by that, too. That's probably normal.
I had a few words with the boss, but nothing serious.
Boss probably said, Say, Jim, by the way, where were you all day yesterday anyhow, Nothing real serious.
Then I decided to drive into the country and see one of my prospects for a car.
What's more normal? This guy's a car salesman. He wants to get away from the shop a while, get away from the boss, drive out in the country and see someone we already know to try to sell a car to. Normal, sane thinking for an alcoholic car salesman.
He said, on the way I felt hungry, so I stopped at a roadside place where they have a bar. I had no intention of drinking. I just thought I'd get a sandwich.
What's more normal than if you're hungry to stop in a place and get a sandwich? The fact that they got a bar is beside the point. We have no intention of drinking. We're hungry and we're going to get a sandwich. Normal, sane thinking for an alcoholic car salesman.
So I also had the notion I might find a customer for a car at this place which was familiar, for I'd been going to it for years. I'd eaten there many times during the months I was sober.
See, we've been in there many times before during our sobriety, and we're not going in there to drink. We're hungry, we're going to get a sandwich, and we might find another customer for a car while we're in there. Normal, sane thinking for an alcoholic car salesman.
He says, I sat down at a table and ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk.
You know, what's more normal than if you're hungry? To sit down on a table and order a sandwich and a glass of milk.
Still no thought of drinking. I ordered another sandwich, decided to have another glass of milk.
Now, if you're hungry enough, there's nothing wrong with 2 sandwiches and 2 glasses of milk. Unless you're a member of Overeaters Anonymous, you better look at it closely then. But 2 sandwiches and 2 glasses of milk, that's normal, sane thinking for an alcoholic car salesman. Now comes the squiggly writing.
Yeah, that's italic, and it says suddenly. That means right now, suddenly. The thought crossed my mind that if I would put an ounce of whiskey into my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach.
Now, this is absolute insanity, isn't it? for him to believe that he can take whiskey and mix it with milk and it won't hurt him on a full stomach. Now, based on the insane idea, he makes a decision and takes some action.
He said, I ordered whiskey and poured it into the milk. And I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart. But felt reassured as I was taking whiskey on a full stomach.
Now we've got it inside ourselves. The physical allergy takes over. And now then we can't stop.
The experiment went so well that I ordered another whiskey and poured it into more milk. That didn't seem to bother me, so I tried another. I don't know about you. Has anybody here ever put whiskey in the milk? It clabbers up, doesn't it? I say it clabbers up, doesn't it? Scotch don't clabber the milk. So if you ever want a little information, if you want to drink some scotch and some milk, it'll be okay. It won't clabber. Thus started one more journey to this island for Jim. Here was the threat of commitment, the loss of family and position, to say nothing of that intense mental and physical suffering which drinking always caused him. Now, he had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic. Yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in the favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if only he mixed it with milk. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? And I guess if you were looking for a definition of insanity, there's the one right there, pretty good. A lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else but insanity.
Okay, now is old Jim's real problem the fact that he has a physical allergy to alcohol, or that he has a form of insanity that tells him it's okay to drink alcohol mixed with milk on a full stomach? The real problem centers in the mind telling us we can drink rather than in the body that ensures that we can't drink. Perfect example of the insanity of alcoholism. I think it's time to go to lunch. What time are we supposed to be back? 1:30. Okay.
And what is the plan for lunch? Is there a particular plan?
Okay, everybody ready to go?
Anybody sleepy?
How about us telling one little joke before we get started, okay?
Yeah.
Told a story last night about the alcoholic and the brain surgeon. Another little story about the alcoholic and the Al-Anon and the Alateen. And I assume we have some Al-Anons in the room, am I right? Do we have any Al-Anons? Oh, great, that's fine. They had been to an AA convention, and on the way home they decided to take a different route and see some new country. And they got out in the countryside and they got themselves lost. And they were desperately trying to find their way out, and finally they came to an old farmer's house and went up and knocked on the door, and the farmer came to the door and they told him what the problem was, and he said, well, it's easy for me to tell you how to get out of here. But he said, it's getting so close to dark, you're probably going to get lost again. Why don't you just spend the night with us here at the farm and get up and go home in the morning? And they said, okay, yeah, great, that would be fine. And the farmer said, we've got just one problem, though. He said, I can only sleep two of you here in the house. One of you will have to go down in the barn and sleep with the animals. Excuse me, it'll go away after a while, I hope. Little Alateen said, well, let me go down there and sleep with the animals. He said, I love animals and they love me and everything will be fine. So they all go to bed with the Alateen down in the barn, and about an hour there's a knock on the door. Farmer goes to the door and there stands the Alateen. Said, man, I can't sleep down there. He said, the pigs are grunting, the cows are mooing, the horses are stomping their feet, and the chickens are clucking, and said, I just can't sleep. And the alcoholic said, well, all right, come on in and go to bed. He said, I'll go down in the barn and I'll sleep with the animals. He said, I was raised on a farm and I understand animals. They understand me. Be no problem. So they all go to bed with the alcoholic down in the barn. In about an hour, there's a knock on the door. Farmer goes to the door and there stands the alcoholic. He said, man, I can't sleep down there either. He said, those pigs are grunting, the cows are mooing, the horses are stomping their feet, and the chickens are clucking, and I just can't sleep. And the Al-Anon said, well, come on in and go to bed. I knew it would be up to me to handle the situation to start with. I'll go down in the barn and I'll sleep with the animals. So they all go to bed with the Al-Anon down in the barn, and about an hour there's a knock on the door. Farmer goes to the door and there stands the pigs and the cows and the chickens. All kidding aside, we love Al-Anon. You know, my wife has been an Al-Anon now for 36 years. Got a fine Al-Anon program. If it hadn't been for Al-Anon, well, she and I wouldn't be living together today. I'm sure about that.
The fact is that anybody can become an alcoholic, but you got to know somebody to become an Al-Anon.
That's right. Okay. We left off just before lunch, still talking about the insanity of alcoholism, that thing we need to be restored from. And we've looked at the man of 30, and we've looked at Jim. And let's go over to page 37 now and go down to the bottom of the page, the last paragraph. It says, our behavior is as absurd and incomprehensible with respect to the first drink as that of an individual with a passion, say, for jaywalking. He gets a thrill out of skipping in front of fast-moving vehicles. Now, I don't understand this guy at all, but I can see him out here on the interstate waiting for a big bus to come along or a big truck, jumps out in front of it, spins around 2 or 3 times, sees how close it can come to hitting him without actually hitting him. For some reason, he gets a thrill out of it. I don't understand him, but I can see him doing it. Now, he enjoys himself for a few years in spite of friendly warnings. People are saying, hey, Jack, you better quit doing that. You're going to get hurt one of these days. He pays no attention to them. Up to this point, you would label him as a foolish chap having queer ideas of fun. Luck then deserts him, and he's slightly injured several times in succession. Getting a little older now, he can't move as fast. They begin to hit him once in a while. Nothing real serious. He just kind of bounces off of them. Now, you would expect him, if he were normal, to cut it out. But presently he's hit again. This time has a fractured skull. He gets hurt pretty bad this time. Within a week after leaving the hospital, a fast-moving trolley car breaks his arm. He gets hurt pretty bad again. Now, he sings their national anthem. He tells you he's decided to stop jaywalking for good. He said, man, I'm through with this jaywalking. I'm tired of these fractured skulls and broken arms. I'll never jaywalk again as long as I live. But in a few weeks, he breaks both legs. Now, on through the years, this conduct continues, accompanied by his continual promises to be careful or to keep off the streets altogether. Finally, he can no longer work. He's just so beat up now he can't hold a job. His wife gets a divorce. She's tired of supporting him and the kids and paying the hospital bills, and he's held up to ridicule. He tries every known means to get the jaywalking idea out of his head, not his body, his head. He shuts himself up in a treatment center hoping to mend his ways. But the day he comes out, he races in front of a fire engine, which breaks his back. Now, such a man would be crazy, wouldn't he? Now, you may think our illustration is too ridiculous, but is it? We who have been through the ringer have to admit if we substituted alcoholism for jaywalking, the illustration would fit us exactly. However intelligent we may have been in other respects where alcohol has been involved, we've been strangely insane. It's strong language, but isn't it true? Now, some of you are thinking, yes, what you tell us is true, but it doesn't fully apply. Well, we admit we have some of these symptoms, but we've not gone to the extremes you fellows did, nor are we likely to, for we understand ourselves so well after what you've told us that such things could not happen again. We've not lost everything through drinking, in life through drinking, and we certainly do not intend to. Thanks for the information. Now remember the day I told him that too.
Except he said, kiss my.
Now that may be true of certain non-alcoholic people who, though drinking foolishly and heavily at the present time, are able to stop or moderate because their brains and bodies have not been damaged as ours were. But the actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. This is a point we wish to emphasize and re-emphasize, to smash home upon our alcoholic readers as it has been revealed to us out of bitter experience. Let us take another illustration. Now, you know, we looked at old Jim, and Jim was what we would refer to as a low-bottom drunk. Jim had lost everything that he had, lost his business, lost everything. And it wasn't quite so difficult for Jim to see what his problem was. But again, today, through education, many, many people are coming to us long before they have to lose everything. We call that a high-bottom drunk. And sometimes it's a little more difficult for the high-bottom drunk to see the desperation as it is for the low-bottom drunk. Jim was a low-bottom illustration. The next one is a guy named Fred, and he's a high-bottom drunk. But he ends up getting drunk just exactly like Jim did. He believed a lie just before he took the first drink. Let's look at the lie that Fred believed before he got drunk.
Said Fred's a partner in a well-known accounting firm. His income is good. He has a fine home, is happily married, and father of promising children of college age. He has so attractive a personality that he makes friends with everyone. If ever there was a successful businessman, it's Fred. To all appearance, he's a stable, well-balanced individual, yet he's alcoholic. We first saw Fred about a year ago in a hospital where he'd gone to recover from a bad case of the jitters. It was his first experience of this kind, and he was much ashamed of it. Far from admitting that he was an alcoholic, he told himself he'd come to the hospital to rest his nerves.
We see lots of nerve resters in AA today, just like old Fred.
The doctor intimated strongly that he might be worse than he realized. For a few days he was depressed about his condition. Now, he made up his mind to quit drinking altogether. It never occurred to him that perhaps he could not do so in spite of his character and standing. Fred would not believe himself an alcoholic.
He would not take step one.
Much less accept a spiritual remedy for his problem.
You can't take one, you can't take two.
Now, we told him what we knew about alcoholism.
They told him about step 1 and 2.
And he was interested and could see that he had some of the symptoms. But he was a long way from admitting that he could do nothing about it himself. He was positive that his humiliating experience, plus the knowledge he had acquired, would keep him sober the rest of his life. Self-knowledge would fix it. Now, we heard no more of Fred for a while. One day we were told that he was back in the hospital. This time he was quite shaky. He soon indicated he was anxious to see us. The story he told is most instructive. For here was a chap absolutely convinced he had to stop drinking, who had no excuse for drinking, who exhibited splendid judgment and determination in all his other concerns, yet was flat on his back nevertheless. Well, let him tell you about it. He said, I was much impressed with what you fellows said about alcoholism, and I frankly did not believe it would be possible for me to drink again. And I rather appreciate your ideas about that subtle insanity which precedes the first drink. But I was confident it could not happen to me after what I'd learned. I reasoned I was not so far advanced as most of you fellows, that I had been usually successful in licking my other personal problems, and that I would therefore be successful where you men had failed. I felt I had every right to be self-confident. That would be only a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard. Now, in this frame of mind, I went about my business, and for a time all was well. I had no trouble refusing drinks, and I began to wonder if I had not been making too hard a work of a simple matter. We believe that old Fred started getting drunk right there. So he began to tell himself, well, it wasn't as bad as they said it was. One day I went to Washington to present some accounting evidence to a government bureau. I'd been out of town before during this particular dry spell, so there was nothing new about that. Physically, I felt fine. Neither I have any pressing problems or worries. My business came off well. I was pleased and knew my partners would be too. It was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. Everything was going well for old Fred at this time.
Well, he's just floating along, and he's feeling great, and it's the end of a perfect day, and not a cloud on the horizon. I went to my hotel and leisurely dressed for dinner. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind that it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails and go back to the hospital. Yeah, now that's the truth, isn't it? But you see, he couldn't drink on the truth. He had to drink on a lie. He said it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails with dinner. That was all. Now, based on this insane idea, he said I ordered a cocktail and my meal. Then I ordered another cocktail. Now we've got inside ourselves now. The allergy takes over and we can't stop. After dinner, I decided to take a walk. When I returned to the hotel, it struck me a highball would be fine before going to bed, so I stepped into the bar and had one. I remember having several more that night and plenty next morning. I have a shadowy recollection of being in an airplane bound for New York and of finding a friendly taxicab driver at the landing field instead of my wife. The driver escorted me about for several days. I know little of where I went or what I said and did. Then came the hospital with unbearable mental and physical suffering. As soon as I regained my ability to think, I went carefully over that evening in Washington. Not only had I been off guard, I had made no fight whatever against the first drink. This time I had not thought of the consequences at all. I'd commenced to drink as carelessly as though the cocktails were ginger ale. You see, old Jim, he vaguely sensed he wasn't been any too smart. Fred didn't even sense that. Fred just thought a couple of cocktails before dinner would be great. And based on the insane idea, he took a couple of drinks, triggered the allergy, couldn't stop drinking, ended up drunk and sick and in all kinds of trouble. Now, is his real problem the fact that he has a physical allergy to alcohol? Or that he has a form of insanity that tells him it's okay to drink alcohol? The real problem centers in the mind, telling us we can drink, rather than in the body that ensures that we can't drink. Let's go to page 43, last paragraph.
He says, once more. He just got through telling us through the illustration of Man of 30, Jim, Jay Walker, and Fred. He told us through Bill's story that he couldn't stay sober on self-knowledge. Roland couldn't stay sober on self-knowledge. Jim couldn't stay sober on self-knowledge. And Fred couldn't stay sober on self-knowledge. So they're going to tell us once more. He done told us about 6 or 7 times. He said, now once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. So you can't heal a sick mind with a sick mind. You can't think your way out of it. The more we try to think our way out of it, the deeper into it we get. So our defense must come from a higher power. And you notice he didn't say the drinking alcoholic either. He said the alcoholic. That means us in this room today who are alcoholic. Our defense must come from a higher power.
Okay, at the end of chapter 3 now, he's closed the door on me now. He's left no doubt in my mind at all that if I don't find this power greater than I am, this God as I understand him, that eventually I'm going to become insane and I'm going to go back to drinking all over again, time after time after time. Now, if you're the kind of alcoholic that I am, and if you were raised in the church setting that I was raised in, you are now faced with one hell of a dilemma at the end of chapter 3. Knowing we're going to have to find this power, God as we understand him, or end up going back to drinking. Because you see, I was raised in a good old Southern Baptist church. Now, please don't get me wrong. I have nothing against the good old Southern Baptist church. It's a good church. It was then, still is today. And I'm sure when I was a kid growing up in that Baptist church, they probably talked about a kind and a loving God. But if they did, that message never got to the pew that I sat in. Because all I ever remember about God as I was a kid growing up in church was hellfire and damnation. Going to hell for lying and cheating and stealing and drinking whiskey and committing adultery. And by the time I got to AA, I'd been doing that for about 26 years. And I knew that God had already told St. Peter, when that little four-eyed sucker gets up here, send them downstairs. We'll not need his kind. And now then, I'm faced with a dilemma. Either find God or go back to drinking, one of the two. And it would seem to be an impossible situation, because I knew that if God's going to have anything to do with me, it wouldn't be anything good. It would certainly be something bad. You know, I'll never forget when I really separated from the church and separated from God. As that kid growing up in the church, they gave me the rules. And they told me what I could do and what I couldn't do. They said, if you do this, this, and this, you'll be okay. If you do that, that, and that, you're going to hell just sure as anything. And I didn't have any trouble with their rules at all until I got to be about 12 or 13 years old. And one day it seemed as though the preacher looked me straight in the eye, and he said, to think about doing it is just as bad as doing it. And I thought, oh, shit. I thought I've had it now, because I'd been thinking about doing it for about a year. In fact, I'd been thinking about doing it so much I was beginning to get a little brain damage from it. And I said to myself, if you're going to go to hell for thinking about doing it, then you might as well just go ahead and do it. And I did it. And I didn't go to hell immediately. And I said to myself, that sucker has been lying to me all along. And I made up my mind that time that preacher and my parents and my teachers had joined together in a conspiracy to keep me from having any fun. And I said, to hell with them. From this day on, I'm not going to pay any attention to what they say, what God says, or anybody else. I'm going to have fun, and I'm going to do what I want to, whenever I want to, and to hell with the rest of them. And I walked away from church, and I walked away from God, and I walked away from any kind of discipline from anybody or any source. Now, when I came to AA, I was 38 years old when I walked in the door of AA. And I had the spiritual knowledge of a 12 or 13-year-old kid that was absolutely, completely scared to death about God. And I found myself in one hell of a dilemma when I finished up on chapter 3. Thank God Bill Wilson's a real alcoholic. Thank God he knew how I was going to feel, because he felt the same way. And I think Bill sat down here at the end of chapter 3, probably reviewing what he had done in the book up to this point. And I think he was able to say to himself, well, I was able to show them the problem through the doctor's opinion and my story, Bill's story. I was able to show them the solution to the problem in chapter 2. I was able to show them what's going to happen to them if they don't find that solution because of the insanity in chapter 3. And then he probably said to himself, they're not going to like that solution a bit better than I liked that solution. You remember Bill had a hard time with this. And I think he said to himself, maybe I better give them some new information. Maybe I better give them some new information about this higher power, or this God as we understand him, so that with some new information, maybe they can discard some old ideas and be able to accept some new ideas, and then be able to make a decision about this thing. Because the very next thing we're going to have to do is decide about this God thing. And based on old ideas, old prejudices that I had as a kid growing up, there's just simply no way I could have made that decision. Thank God he wrote chapter 4, We Agnostics. I think it's one of the greatest pieces of spiritual information I've ever read. It does not in any way attempt to prove to me that there's any kind of God, period. It does not attempt to force any kind of God on me. What it does do is give me some new information about God. And from that new information, I was able to discard some of those old ideas about God, and then I was able to make a decision. But I never could have made it without chapter 4. I think it's one of the greatest pieces of the big book, period.
You know, I love this part of the book. This we agnostic. Gnostic means knowledge. You put the ag in front of it, it means without. Those of us who are without knowledge, or at least the knowledge we had, like Charlie said, a 12, or in my case, a 7-year-old boy. Bill knew we were going to have the same kind of thoughts that he did. Remember, he said, when they talked of a God personal to me, my mind snapped shut against such theories. Later on in our book, it says that when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. This is an attempt to straighten out spiritually, the spiritual malady. And I remember when I was, one time with my first wife, I was trying to get back with her, and I threw a little sober spell and went to church with her for a little while. I was desperate. And I went in and talked to the preacher, and he looked at me and said, Joe, what seems to be your problem? Well, I didn't know what my problem was, so I told him what I thought it was, and it was her. If you live with her, you drink too, I told him. And you know those old Southern Baptist preachers, they'll give you a solution. And he said, you must, and boy, did he emphasize that word must, you must have faith in these things. And he told me what they were. And I just looked at them, and I had to walk away from them and leave them. You know why? How can you have faith in something that you don't even believe? Thank God for the second step, where it said we could come to believe. It didn't say we come to have faith. It said we could come to believe. And I had to come to believe. And this chapter, We Agnostic, is an attempt to help me to come to believe with more information, new information that I didn't have, because the information I had was that of a 7-year-old boy when I first got here. So let's look at this thing in this chapter, and simply all we have to do when reading this chapter is just to wonder and to think and to see if any of these things apply to me and to wonder about them. And our minds will open up. That's what this chapter is about. Our mind is open up, and then God can prove to us that there's a God. And once that happens, nobody else can improve upon that, because you'll know that you know. And I know that I know today from past experiences. On page 44, it says, in the preceding chapters, you've learned something of alcoholism. We hope we've made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely,
That's because of the obsession.
or if when drinking you have little control of the amount you take,
That's because of the allergy.
you are probably an alcoholic. Isn't that simple? If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness, which only a spiritual experience will conquer.
We just love the simplicity of the big book. 2 little questions to determine if you're alcoholic. People come to me today and they say, Charlie, you think I might be alcoholic? I say, I don't know. Let me ask you a couple of questions. Have you been able to quit drinking entirely, left on your own resources? If they're a real alcoholic, they got to say no. And I say, do you have any control over the amount you drink after you once start drinking? If they're a real alcoholic, they got to say no. And I say, well, then you're probably alcoholic. It's just that simple. But you see how people love to change things. Our fellowship took these 2 little questions out of the big book, and next thing you know, we had a little pamphlet that had 10 questions in it to see if you're alcoholic. And that wasn't enough, and after a while we had one that had 20 questions in it to see if you're alcoholic. Hell, I think we're up to 44 questions today, see? We just need these 2 little simple questions. Joe and I had an old friend that used to live in Tyler, Texas. His name was Wino Joe. I've always been sorry for anybody in AA that didn't get to meet Wino Joe. He was a real character. And Wino Joe had made up his own list of questions to see if you're alcoholic. And the first question on his list was, has the roof of your mouth ever been sunburned?
Oh, thank you. Joe used to like to lay out in them cotton fields and drink wine, and his roof of his mouth would get sunburned.
The second question on his list is, have you ever been arrested for drunk driving from the back seat of somebody else's car? And the one I really liked, have you ever been arrested for public drunk while in jail, he said.
There's a question in the 44 question that says, do you drink alone? Think about that. If I'm buying, yes. If you're buying, no.
Now, if that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. You know, we are very unique people. We number amongst a few people in the world today that have a twofold illness, an illness of the body as well as an illness of the mind, that can only be overcome by a spiritual experience. We also number amongst a few people in the world today that have a terminal illness, that we can come out of it in better shape than we went into it if we can have that spiritual experience. The one who feels he's an atheist or an agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. But to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he's an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death,
Step 1.
or to live on a spiritual basis,
Step 2.
are not always easy alternatives to face. But it isn't so difficult. About half our original fellowship were of exactly that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics. But after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life or else. Perhaps it's going to be that way with you. But cheer up. Something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics, and our experience shows that you need not be disconcerted. And I think he's telling us here, it really doesn't make any difference what you believe right now, that you're still going to be able to have this spiritual experience. Now, for an atheist, a spiritual experience would seem to be impossible, because you see, an atheist says there is no God, period. Therefore, the atheist has no higher power to turn to. And they got to stand on their own 2 feet and run their own show and rule their own destiny. So a spiritual experience would seem to be impossible for them. An agnostic is one who believes there is a God, but has no knowledge about that God. The agnostic, even though they believed in God, has never turned to God for help, stood on their own 2 feet, run their own show, rule their own destiny, just like the atheist does. The only difference is the agnostic believes there might be a God of some kind. In either case, they can get no help from the power greater than human power. I've never seen a true atheist in AA. You know, even an atheist will recognize the fact there's some power somewhere in this universe that seems to run the whole show of some kind. I think most of us come here probably as agnostics. Most of us believe that there is a power greater than human power, a God of some kind. But most of us haven't been turning to that power for help. Most of us have been running our own show, making our own decisions, ruling our own destiny, and we got exactly what the atheist got, which is nothing from that power greater than human power. But it makes no difference which one we might be. We're still going to be able to have the spiritual experience. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. We alcoholics are not drunken bums. Drunken bums are out there about where they want to be, and they're not too interested in changing the situation. But we alcoholics, we have a set of morals, and we have a philosophy of life. And we may be out there drinking with a drunken bum, but we don't want to be there. And if those morals and philosophies had saved us, we would have recovered a long time ago. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. You know, if you and I could have solved this problem on our own, through our morals and our philosophies and our will, we would not be members of AA today. AA is the court of last resort. We came here only because we had no place left to go. I've never seen anybody in AA that said, I came to AA or took a first drink when I was 13 years old and jumped up and down and shouted with joy and said, I can hardly wait to be a member of AA when I'm 32. We're here because we got no place else to go. And the book says, lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live. And it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. But where and how were we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. It doesn't say which will enable you to solve your problem, or which will help you solve your problem. It says which will solve your problem. And we find, interestingly enough, from page 45 on in the big book, we don't talk about alcohol anymore. We talk about one thing and one thing only. For those of us who are powerless, how do we find the power? And if we can find the power, then the power will solve the problem. So if I'm going to have to find the power, then the first thing I'm going to have to know is, okay, where do I start?
On page 46. It's a little process we go through here. First paragraph. It said, yes, we of agnostic temper have these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice, which is old ideas, and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power, which is God. My little friend George is dead now. My little friend George, black guy named George, loved him dearly. He saved my life. He said, Joe, you're having real trouble with this God idea, aren't you? I said, George, I'm having a terrible time. I just can't get started. I just don't know what to do. And he said, well, why don't you do what he done? He said, won't you just lay aside all the things that you think you know about God? Just lay them aside on the shelf in your mind. Go home and get you a pencil and a piece of paper out and write down what you would like God to be. Just you. Don't forget about anything that you know. If you could make God, what would you want it to be? Well, see, I didn't know you could do that. Down in Oklahoma, you go to hell for doing that. I'll tell you that. But he gave me permission. And so I went home and I wrote down some things that I would like God to be, and I showed them to George, and he said, that's good. You can start there. See, that's what I needed, was a starting place. I was trying to start as a 7-year-old. I needed to lay that stuff aside and find another starting place.
Now listen very carefully to what this says. Much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect a contact with him. I'm like Joe, I didn't know you could do that. In the good old Southern Baptist Church, you'll go to hell for doing that. You have to believe as they believe. And I didn't know that you could have your own conception of God. And as we said before, one of the things that makes it so great is we don't have any problem with our own conception of anything. Let me believe in God the way I want to. You betcha my ideas are beginning to change about God already. An old idea cast aside that said I had to believe as they believed has been cast aside. A new idea that's taken its place. I can have my own God, my own conception of my own understanding.
I said, George, I said, George, you mean I got to find God? And he said, Joe, God's not lost.
As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things, we begin to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek Him. To us, the realm of the Spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding. To those who earnestly seek, it is open, we believe, to all men. Brand new idea here. We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek Him. I was taught that the way to God is a very narrow path. And if you fall off of that sucker on either side, you're in bad, bad trouble. This thing is saying that isn't necessarily true. That God does not make too hard terms with those who seek Him. The other thing I was taught is if you didn't believe like they did, then you were going to go to hell just sure as anything. And it said to us, the realm of the Spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who are. It is open, we believe, to all men. Man, this is brand new information for a guy like me that was raised in that good old Southern Baptist church. Old ideas are being cast aside, being replaced with a new set of ideas. Now let's look on page 47.
So you notice that it said it's in the seeking for those who earnestly seek. It's not in the finding, it's in the seeking. And when you seek God, or at least me, then God will disclose Himself to me. And as I look back over these years, I realize that's what's happened. I've been seeking God in my life. Not in finding, but in seeking. And God has disclosed Himself to me a little at a time. And my understanding of God today is better than it was when I first started. I have a better understanding today. On page 47 it said, when therefore we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God. This applies to other spiritual expressions which you find in this book. Do not let any prejudice.
Now remember, prejudice is old ideas.
You may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. See, that's the question. What do these things mean to me? At the start, this was all that we needed to commence spiritual growth, to effect our first conscious relation with God as we understood Him. And then afterwards, we found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach. That was growth, but if we wished to grow, we had to begin somewhere. So we used our own conception, however limited it was. I needed a starting point. George gave me a starting point, and it was certainly very, very limited. Now we need to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe?
The agnostic has always believed.
Or am I even willing to believe?
The atheist can become willing to believe.
That there's a power greater than myself. And as soon as a man can say that he does believe,
the agnostic,
or is willing to believe,
the atheist,
we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. And it has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. Again, the asterisk, please be sure to read Appendix 2 on spiritual experience. They will make sure we understand what they mean by that, you see. And George said, Joe, if you can't find a power greater than yourself, at least find one other than yourself.
Now, the book says that was great news for us, for we had assumed we could not make use of spiritual principles unless we accepted many things on faith which seemed difficult to believe. Now, right here, he separates the words, belief and faith. And one of the problems I always had as that kid growing up is the minister always said, son, all you got to do is have faith and everything be all right. Well, faith implies surety. Faith implies knowledge. I never had any faith that God would do for me what I couldn't do for myself because I'd never really tried to get Him to do so. I didn't have any faith. The best we can possibly do to start is to believe. Belief is upfront information. Belief can be nothing more than just suspicion. Let me give you a good example. Let's say I move into this area here, and after I've been here 2 or 3 months, I've got a problem with my automobile. Now, I don't know a good mechanic anywhere in this area, but you've been here for years, and I'm pretty sure you'll know somebody. So I come to you and I ask you, I say, look, I've got a problem with my car and I need a good mechanic. Can you recommend somebody?